Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the sixth YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Yes, it's our 10th anniversary for Read for Pixels. And today's YouTube session is also our 19th Read for Pixels live stream author event, author panel, since we started hosting panels in 2018. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And we have a really interesting topic for today's panel. It's No More Heartbreak, a 10-year retrospective on sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in romance. And here to participate in this discussion are three award-winning best-selling romance authors who are also Read for Pixels alumni. Um, First off, right below me is the award-winning best-selling author Liana Renee Heber. Liana is a four-time Prism Award winner for excellence in the genre of fantasy romance. Liana writes historical fantasy novels for Tor and Kensington Books, such as the Strangely Beautiful Saga, the Eterna Files trilogy, and the Spectral City series. Her short stories have been featured in notable anthologies, and her books have been selected for National Book Club editions, as well as translated into many languages. And next to me is Maya Rodale. Maya is the best-selling and award-winning author of funny feminist fiction, including historical romance, young adult, and historical fiction. A champion of the romance genre and its readers, she is also the author of Dangerous Books for Girls, The Bad Reputation of Romance Novels, Explained. Maya has reviewed romance for NPR Books and has appeared in Bustle, Glamour, Shondaland, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and PBS. And finally, it's Sonali Dev right below Maya. And Sonali is a USA Today best-selling author whose novels have been named Best Books of the Year by Library Journal, NPR, The Washington Post, Kirkus, BuzzFeed, and Pop Sugar. She has won numerous accolades, including the American Library Association's Award for Best Romance, the RT Reviewer Choice Award, multiple RT Seals of Excellence, and has been a Rita finalist and has been listed for the Dublin Literary Award. So welcome everybody. Some of you attending the panel today were probably also expecting to see acclaimed historical romance author Mimi Matthews. Sadly, Mimi has had to bow out for personal reasons, and she sends everyone on the panel her very best and hopes that everyone attending the session will have a good time this evening. And aside from today's panel, we also have some dreamy romance treats available this week as part of the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels 10th anniversary Rally Up fundraising page. Now, Liana and Sonali's goodies were available earlier this year during our International Women's Day edition of the Read for Pixels fundraiser, but for our 10th anniversary fundraiser, Maya and a few other romance luminaries have some fabulous treats for everyone who just loves romance. So let's have a look at Maya's goodies. Maya has donated 2 goodie bundles for your romantic reading pleasure. Goodie bundle number 1 is the Regency Wallflowers goodie bundle. That's one set of the Wallflowers trilogy. It's a mass paperback edition, signed and personalized by Maya for you, and it features a trio of best friends determined to get married after 4 seasons on the marriage market. And the goodie bundle number 2 is the Gilded Age Girls Club goodie bundle. This is like my personal favorite, everyone. I love this one. And it's one set of the Gilded Age Girls Club trilogy, also a mass paperback edition signed and personalized by Maya for you, featuring some very enterprising heroines who succeed against all odds. And both bundles have 2 types of exclusive extras, including 1 personal handwritten and signed letter from Maya and 1 set of fun stickers. And Eloisa Jane's The Grand Dames of Historical Romances is offering free bundles which each contain one signed hardcover edition and one bookmark. And the first bundle has Midnight Pleasures. The second bundle has a copy of Wild Child from her Wild Romances. And the third bundle is the Lizzie and Dante bundle, which is Eloisa writing contemporary romance and women's fiction as Mary Bly. And Nalini Singh has also, now before I go on, Maya and Eloisa's goodies are only for US donors. And Nalini Singh has a bundle for donors anywhere in the world. It's a side changeling Trinity bundle, which are full of hardcover editions. The first 3 books are in there. And Nalini's books have been scooped up by a donor already. And the donor wishes to remain anonymous, and they have donated a cool $180 to us for Nalini's book set. And we would like to thank the anonymous donor. And finally, even though Mimi can't be here today, she has a very special treat for historical romance fans. She will be writing an original story of approximately 500 words about one of her most popular couples, Justin and Helena, from the Matrimonial Advertisement, to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Read for Pixels campaign. There are only 25 copies of the story available, and Mimi will email donors a soft copy of the story for their enjoyment. As of now, there are 16 copies left, and they are steadily being snapped up as we speak, so don't wait to donate to get your copy. And we've raised $3,955, which is 39% towards our $10,000 goal so far, so please give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2023. All funds go towards supporting the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And you, the audience, before we begin, you, the audience, will also be able to ask Maya, Sonali, and Leanna questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Xiao Chin, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Leanna, Maya, and Sonali to answer. And we'll put your questions on screen as well. And now onwards to the panel session. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get started on the questions. So romance is the biggest selling genre today, with many of the biggest names reaching the top of the bestseller list, including the New York Times. Over the past decade, it has had a breakthrough on screen with shows like Bridgerton, Virgin River, and My Happy Marriage, drawing huge numbers of viewers and demonstrating the appeal of a good feminist love story. Yet, despite the genre's massive readership and the considerable progress it has made in addressing issues such as consent, sexism, misogyny, and violence against women, romance continues to be criticized for being anti-feminist, of providing unrealistic portrayals of sexual and romantic relationships, and of glorifying toxic relationships. Now, when the Pixel Project created Read for Pixels as part of our work to end violence against women, we did so because we recognize that storytelling, and storytellers, including authors, in pop culture play a key role in awareness raising when it comes to difficult social issues such as violence against women. However, we were and still are keenly aware that popular genre fiction, including romance, can reflect the sexism, misogyny, and violence against women still happening across society, and in many cases may play a role in perpetuating these issues by normalizing such beliefs. In honor of the 10th anniversary of the Read for Pixels campaign, today's panel will be discussing how the romance genre has progressed and changed over the past decade with regards to sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in their stories and books, as well as what the romance community, including authors, readers, publishers, and fandoms, can do about it. Now, all of you have been writing romance novels and stories that feature compelling female characters and progressive male characters in a genre that has come a really long way from the bodice rippers of the 1970s and the 1980s. In fact, I'm going to make this bold statement, which is romance is miles ahead of other genres with regards to the portrayal of courtship with consent and the development of relationships with mutual respect between the male and female protagonists. Now, the first question. In your opinion, what are the major changes in the way romance novels and stories have handled sexism, misogyny, and violence against women over the past 10 years? So I guess we'll go clockwise. So we'll start with Maya.
Well, first, thank you, Regina, for organizing this and for all you do with Read for Pixels and the Pixel Project. We're all honored to support you and this cause, and thank you for bringing us all together. I already forget the question.
It's in your opinion, what are the major changes in the way romance novels and stories have handled sexism, misogyny, and violence against women over the past decade?
Yeah, so that is such a broad and wonderful topic. I think we could all and all will give very different answers. And I think what romance has been doing these past 10 years and probably has been doing since the beginning is it's always in conversation with the greater culture. Um, People who write romance are really paying attention to the cultural conversations we're having in the news and film, TV, other media, and we're bringing that into our stories. And we're also really, really close to our readers. And so there's this amazing back and forth and conversation always happening, and it shows up in our work. So when I started writing romance more than 10 years ago, we were always like, look at how we portray safe sex in romance. Like the hero would always put a condom on. Or, even in a historical where that might be a little, you might need to do a little more explaining. We sometimes did the extra explaining. What was a condom? What was a French letter? Did they use it? Why didn't they use it? Or if they knew it was available, things like that. So we've been doing that for a long time. And I've seen recently, just a lot more awareness on the part of the authors in the dynamics between the heroes and heroines when it comes to how to treat other people. We could say in a sexy situation, we could say just at all, but I think we're really taking this awareness from a conversation we're having culturally and putting it in the way our characters interact with each other.
Sonali?
So yeah, everything. I think everything Maya said, definitely. The biggest, the most interesting change is the safety, but also I remember a time when the idea of stopping in the middle of a sex scene to ask for consent was considered, oh my gosh, that's unromantic. And so we've come from there to a man not asking, feeling completely unacceptable or unromantic, right? So we've gone, I mean, my daughter's generation considers it, she's 22, and I talked to her and her friends, and they consider it a non-negotiable, right, to have guys stop and ask. So it's no longer a thing. How are we going to do this, right? This is awkward. Those were the conversations 10 years ago, and now the conversation would be, it's weird that overt consent was not sought. So that's like a very, I think, tangible change in the kind of romance I read. So and there's so many subgenres, so the sensibilities and the consciousness of each one of them is differs. But I think this is the big and we'll talk about other ways, but I think this was the big one in a more general way. I think so much more of exploring our relationship with ourselves, ourselves, is happening again overtly, right? It's the stories are about how we're coming into ourselves. So it is really a love story of a female protagonist with herself. And that's I think that was always the case, I think, in romance, um, but it had to be sold in this, it had to be subverted. And now we're just able to right out say that this is me finding myself, and at the end I want a happily ever after, but that cannot happen if I'm not in love with myself first at the end. So in those ways, and those are those I think are seeking health at a deeper level. Like we're now getting under the skin, where we're even thinking, what is a healthy relationship, and is it just someone saying I love you and I would take a grenade for you, or is healthy a healthy relationship something more? And then what is that is the essential journey of modern romance novels, I think.
So, Leanna, what do you think?
I love everything that my friends here have said, and I specifically wanted to be on this panel because I love both of their writing very much. And so when I was given the chance to come on here, I was like, I gotta see my friends virtually because I love their writing, and I'm so glad to connect and be a part of this conversation, all of which is as has been already said eloquently, part of a broader conversation that we are all having culturally. One of the really beautiful things that's happened in the past 10 years is how much more diverse the stories we're seeing from people of different backgrounds, from, different classes and all kinds of, whether it's faith backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds. More authors are getting a chance to tell their own stories and see their uh, uh, stories represented more, and I love that because that adds to this rich tapestry of conversations we can be having. And I think the key is conversation. One of the things that romance does so well is that the characters talk. It is a character driven genre, and the characters drive an emotional exchange, and the better that emotional exchange can be, the healthier that can be, the more comprehensive, asking each other what each other wants. That stuff is not only is it sexy, but it's also building healthy foundational relationships. And also too, there's very often really wonderful and rich side characters that also factor into, it's not just the romance, it's also are there other relationships in and around the protagonists that also maybe need some discussion and some addressing. Those of us writing historicals, we're dealing with a time frame where women's rights were constrained in different ways than we are navigating now, although we are still having some of the same discussions. That, it's like, I know Maya and I writing about the Gilded Age, we're like, oh my God, why are we having this conversation? Why are we back here? Why are we back here again? Because there's so much of our modern era that's paralleling a lot of the late 19th century, both in terms of economic stuff, labor discussions, feminism discussions, women's bodily autonomy, things like that. We're all having these conversations that they were having in the 19th century. That's not it's not a modern thing for those of us writing in historical time periods to be talking about women's rights. They were talking about women's rights since the beginning of time. It was just a matter of how the ways in which the parlance, the turns of phrases were different. But that move towards, as Sonali beautifully really put, that self-love, that full self, that's really what I think is really healthy about a lot of romance. Is it's looking at how can we as authors write about people living their fullest, best selves, and then thusly asking for the love that they deserve, and encountering that with someone else. And that to me is just very exciting, is to have the ongoing conversation about what is healthiest and happiest and joyous and sexy and all of these great things without that being in conflict with all the constraints.
Yeah. So that earlier on, all of you said that in one form or another, that romance is in dialogue with the wider pop culture, wider popular culture and the arts. And so do you think the way much of the romance genre has evolved to normalize the importance of consent and address sexism, misogyny, and violence against women, do you think romance has had any influence on other genres and wider pop culture, Maya?
I don't know that I can speak so clearly to that because I don't consume anything besides romance. But you really hope with something like Bridgerton, which was phenomenally successful and one of the most watched shows on Netflix ever, that makes everyone else sit up and take notice and come looking for more of that and things like that. But I can't point to specifics of how romance has influenced other things, but I do know that a lot of other writing communities look to what romance is doing and say, okay, that's where we need to go.
Yeah. Sonali, what do you think?
So I think for one, the female centric story, which is almost, one of the largest kind of hallmarks of romance, is that before any other genre, romance was the one putting women at the center of the story, right? It is the essential feminine journey, which is a thing we were not, like, growing up. This is the reason I'm obsessed with, or was growing up obsessed with, Jane Austen. Was that in all the stories around me, women were never at the center. All the classics I was reading, and I was growing up in India, studying in English, thanks to colonization. But so the stories I was, and the literature I was consuming was Western literature, and in that, women desiring things usually meant they ended up in a padded cell or dead, or not getting what they want, and learning the good lesson of being okay with that, right? And the same way in all of the epics, in Indian stories and in Bollywood and in Hollywood, the stories were very squarely about men, from their perspective, about them. They centered men in every way. And I think that, starting with Jane Austen, and then for a long time it didn't happen again. I think from the books I've read, she was she was the first person I read who wrote women who desired something and got it in the end. That was just something I had not seen, and I think it changed my life. It changed how I saw myself. Personally, for me, it made me a different Sonali than I would have been. And I think that is the story of a lot of women, once they see that, because we have this essential sense of ourselves, and then everything around us tells us that no, that's not actually true. You're not any of those things, and you're not. And so when there's a story that tells you that what you're feeling about yourself, you're not alone, honey, you're not alone, and it makes you double down on your belief systems and turns you into someone. And so I think that like, when we watch everything that's on, that's streaming right now, I consume a lot of Indian cinema. And in that, huge difference, like having growing up, the heroine was decoration, literally. I mean, you could have just removed the females in the movies and the story would have gone on just fine. It was literally, they had something called item numbers, or they still, I mean, up until that, which literally was throwing in a dance. So women kind of could titillate, right? That was the job. And I feel like now, and this comes from these stories that have centered women, which is the stories that romance authors have written for the past 3 decades, that are now, and I think that's the greatest influence, is to say that the female lens is important, and the female journey is important, and I think that's one of the bigger influences I see changing.
Interesting that you say that, Sonali, because I've just finished watching a K-drama. We were talking about K-drama and called Rookie Historian Gu Hui Yong. And it's about female historians in Joseon period, where they were up against a horribly sexist and misogynist system. The the prince regent had to intervene and set a public example for the women who wanted to work in public civil service. And when they entered that, they faced a lot of stuff. And one of the things I'm going to say that ties what you've observed to what I've watched, and this is a really recent drama, like 2019, is you said that in the Bollywood movies that you were watching that the women were decoration, right? So in this series, you had the female historian who's the protagonist of the series, and she's very cynical, no nonsense. She's been fighting for the right to work and all that. And then there's the cinnamon roll prince who's a secret romance writer, and his romances are bestsellers, and everyone's reading them. And what I found interesting was that the comments of people watching the series is that, well, he's just decoration. Why is he in this? We don't know him. Yeah. So it kind of flipped it, didn't it? It just flipped things around. This is 2019. So I guess we have to progress somewhat.
or that, I think, to me is a spotlight on like true regression, right? When you think any space you're giving a woman is space taken away from a man, that like negative positive thing. Because all the time I was watching some interview with this panel of Indian women, where one was minister of, by minister I mean political, I guess it would be like a senator here, and and one was a very successful producer. And so this bunch of successful women, and a man stands up in the back and says, "When are you going to stop? Like, you've already taken our jobs, you've already taken our stuff. What more do you want?" And essentially, they just said, sit down. Which is essentially what I would say to anyone, right? Why? And I think that our discussion, I'm hoping that we'll touch on, I think one of the important parts of dismantling the patriarchy is talking about how it impacts men, because it is not it harms men too in very real ways that we are finding now. And maybe at the heart of what we were essentially talking about today, which is violence against women, is so much of the harm that the patriarchy does on the surface, but also deeply to men.
Yeah, and I thought that the fact that it struck viewers that why is the prince the love interest just an accessory. I think everybody just started thinking really hard about how women were portrayed. I mean, usually it's the woman in the role, right? And it's total flipping of the script. Anyway, so Leanna, what do you think?
I come at this from a very cross-genre angle. So I have romantic elements in all of my work, but a lot of my books have been shelved in all kinds of different shelves. Sometimes they've been shelved in romance. More often than not, they've been shelved in just in fantasy, in gaslamp fantasy, historical fantasy. So I also have some horror elements in my work. So definitely, because I'm coming from a paranormal angle, there is that other cross-genre angle too. So I touch down in I'm a member of so many different writers organizations. I'm a member of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. I'm a member of the Horror Writers Association. I'm a member of the Historical Novel Society. I'm a member of the International Thriller Writers. I need to renew my Mystery Writers of America membership. Sorry, friends. So, all of these different things, these cross genres, the thing that romance is helping in these other genres is the discussion, like we've been talking about, of centering the female experience. And there's a questioning of the concept of killing off women for male pain, which is a tragic, very all too common thing that happens in a lot of other media. And now finally in the past, like maybe 5, 6, 7 years, the concept of fridging a woman, literally like, icing her out, as in she is dead and taken from the narrative solely for the purpose of another character's growth, is now questioned in a way that it had not been questioned for a really long time. And so I do think that concept of making sure that the woman's experience is not only centered, but that she lives to tell the tale, that I believe is having an effect in other genres, and that's being questioned. Now, in something like horror, where no one is safe, that's, but there's some really interesting discussions of power dynamics happening within horror writers too, and also horror writers of color who are grappling with some really interesting things about their understanding of violences. And there's a great range of dialogue that's happening across all different genres right now. And I think that romance is a part of this larger discussion of, hey, we should be talking about systems of power and oppression and how they limit everyone.
This reminds me, Leanna, of something I heard on a panel Sonali and I were on last summer, was it? For Historical Novel Society. And there was a man who wrote like historical war fiction. And he's like, we now, like, there's a real emphasis and interest on female stories, women's stories. And in that, like, traditionally very male genre. So I think, to circle it back to the original question, and like as Sonali was saying, pointing out the female gaze of romance, it's not just the kissy happy ever after, but that emphasis on the female gaze is, like, as Liana is talking about, profoundly influencing these other genres. It's cool to see.
Yeah, I'm just going to make an observation here that it really irritates me when, the men who run the entertainment industry everywhere think that female audiences are no big deal. I mean, look at romance. It's the best-selling genre in the world.
Look at Barbie.
I was literally just going to say the Barbie movie. Look at the Barbie movie.
I actually started laughing when the reports came in that Barbie outpaced Oppenheimer 2-1 in terms of box office earnings. And I started laughing because Christopher Nolan makes wonderful films, but they are all male-centric. Barely any women in them. So, just
and that particular film, right, I think he has done like the whole silencing of women is so overtly visible. The two women in the are literally choked, like you can feel them unable to be who they want to be. And there is, to his genius, showing that, but we could have leaned into that a little bit. So there's literally two important and two huge stars playing these two women, and it literally is like they have gags on socially, not just in like everything in them. I just felt this pressure on them, and in their own way, they did the only really horrid but only things that they could do to push back against that. And and I think even in male-centric films, that is something that would never have been shown, I think, 10 years ago. And now you're seeing how horribly even men that were looked up to treated, how dispensable women were at large, right?
Yeah, and what was nice about watching Barbie, and I think I laughed till I cried, because all the men in that movie, I have a friend who is a trans woman, and we were having a chat about this because there's a trans woman actress in there as well, actor in there as well, and she said they just went for it. They just went for it, lampooning the patriarchy and all that. And and all the men, and Barbie has elements of romance as well. And what's interesting is that there have been reports from China that Chinese women are using the movie as a litmus test. They're observing their boyfriends to see how their boyfriends react to Barbie. And if their boyfriends reacted really badly, they dumped them. It was reported, I think, in Associated Press. It was a big enough phenomenon that women were using Barbie as a litmus test to see how much misogyny and sexism it brought out in the men they were dating. And then they just dumped. If it was a bad reaction, they just dumped them. So, yes, romance effect on popular culture. Now, we're going to go to the question which expands on what Sonali says that she's hoping we cover today. So, on a related note, do all of you or any of you think that the violent alpha male type character that still populates certain subgenres of romance has started phasing out of the genre over the past decade or so? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that would stick around for much longer than expected? Who wants to go?
I just have like one thought on this. Because your question made me realize, I was like, in my reading, where have all these alpha heroes gone? And when you look at what's been huge for the past few years, it's romantic comedies. And people really leaning into the fun, frothy escape that romance is. We all read any subgenre, genre, flavor of romance for escape. But I think the rom-com has just really leaned into like, this should be fun. And you can't have that with a domineering alpha hero. Like, I don't think those things will really work together, or he'll just come across as laughable. So I cause effect, I don't know, but I've noticed the correlation between collective taste kind of going away from it. However, I know there's also corners of romance where it's still huge, will always be huge. Something for everybody.
Yeah. Sonali, what do you think?
Yeah, I think something for everybody is absolutely true. And one of the things we try to do in romance is further that narrative that really it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to like what you like, and it's okay to, all of that. And so for me, absolutely. I mean, I really don't in real life know women who say, wow, a man who tells me what to do, ooh, that's hot, I mean, it is the single most off-putting thing for every woman I'm close to is a man telling you what to do. Like, it's immediate trigger. Especially, I think, my generation of women, right, who saw our, even our wonderful, equitable fathers do it. We just watched so many men do it so casually that for us it is like, my husband actually has to ask me to breathe if it happens by mistake. He's like, okay, that is, okay, we're getting triggered, that's not what I meant. And so it is this huge thing. And so I think at the heart of and I think that's where this genre where romance reflects really what's happening in the world, right? Because I do feel like it's been the journey of the romance novel kind of lines up with the journey of women in society across the past 3-4 decades, right? And I think this thing where now women who are reading these novels are women who absolutely are triggered by men telling them what to do, the very definition of alpha male becomes, shaky. But I mean, I do love it as a device to make fun of them, and making fun of men not asking for directions, and thinking they're macho. And I love the comic relief of it, and I love that we're in a time when we can do that. And I think that's also freeing for men, who wants to be only leaned on all the time, right? I don't want to. I want to be able to lean sometimes. And I think another thing that's happening in a lot of emotional vulnerability, I think one of the best things we're seeing is emotional vulnerability in heroes. The breaking down and saying, oh my god, I hate my dad, or whatever. Like, even that that line in Pretty Woman when they're in the tub and he says, I paid so much money to my therapist to be able to say I hate my dad, or whatever that line is. But we've been hungry for vulnerability in men, and I think that now we can really like dig into that and really kind of get into that. And also this thing, people are different. We're not a monolith, right? So some women are strong in some ways and not so strong in other ways, and men are strong in some ways and not so. And the whole idea of a relationship, even if it is not man and woman, any relationship is that, right? Filling each other's cracks and kind of showing up where another person is unable to show up. And I think that now that we're thinking of romances in terms of that instead of finding love, I think we're getting somewhere.
Okay, Diana, what do you think?
I think there's a more comprehensive palette now for emotions for people in general, without boxing them in by gender, without boxing them in by sexual orientation. I think that we're seeing a real range of like wanting to see characters be as holistic as possible, as many aspects, as many facets of them as possible. And the alpha male trope is just very limiting. Like Sonali said, it is, and also like Maya said, you can't really have fun with that. It is sort of one note. And I think that anything that's one note just isn't really playing as well anymore. Things have to be really comprehensive. Audiences are savvy. Readership is savvy. Yes, romance readers are voracious, but they're savvy readers. And they'll also read lots of cross genre. So many of my, you know, so many of my readers come at it from romance, and then they'll, bless them, read whatever I'm doing. And I enjoy playing with these concepts too. My favorite hero to write is a cinnamon roll nice guy for the most part. But like I do have a brooding gothic hero, and I do kind of love my brooding gothic heroes too. And they can be very stoic and very stern, very staid in some ways. Certainly in my Strange and Beautiful saga, which is probably my most romantic, because that was the one that was shelved in romance when I first debuted. So my Strange and Beautiful saga has a lot of historic tropes, but I like to poke at them. And so it's really fun for me when the really stoic, really strong, very seemingly impenetrable hero is then completely out of his mind and love, and is vulnerable, and we see that, and his friends won't let him live that down in a loving way. They've wanted that for him. And I think that it's been fun for me to play with those different kinds of color palettes for my heroes and heroines, and just the richer that I can make them, the better. But at the end of the day, like my most recent series, my Spectral City series, that was just me really wanting to write a really nice guy who's very good at his job, who's also very nice to the heroine. And they can have each other's back. And I think that for me is what's really interesting, is sometimes too, is like Sonali said, of like, who wants to be the one who's strong all the time and has to hold up everything. I love it when a true partnership develops, where the characters can see the world around them and maybe how they're being mistreated, and can step in and say, hey, that's not fair. In my Spectral City series, I have a Jewish hero who is in a part of the New York police force as a detective in 1899. There's a great deal of anti-Semitism that's happening at that point. Eve Whitby is, an operative. She's basically a part of the police matrons, but she's sort of running a secret ghost precinct department where she talks to the dead to help solve crime for the living. And she deals with sexism, and he's dealing with this prejudice. And there's examples of where each one of them can draw the line when someone else has stepped out of line and is being creating an ism at them, whether it is a racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, any of these things, and they can band together and say, no, this doesn't fly here. And I think that's been one of the things for me that's really exciting about where we are just in terms of media in general, is that we're really seeing richer and broader and more complicated people. Not always, sometimes the villains are complicated in an interesting way too. So the more holistic and well-rounded, and the more the fullness of character that we get, I think the better. But definitely going back to, especially for our romance readers, I mean, no matter what genre that I write, unless it's specifically a short story that is going into a horror anthology, all of my novels, all of my full-length books, they're always going to have a happy ending no matter what genre I'm writing in, subgenre, because at the end of the day, I do believe in that positivity coming no matter how you get there, getting back towards positivity.
So I'm just going to share an observation I made when Maya interviewed me for her website, that, people always ask me, you are an anti-violence against women activist. Why are you reading fluff? Why are you reading romance? And I'm just going to say, full confession, I've been reading romance since I was in my teens. And I think that it's because it's very easy to get very cynical when you work in the field that I work in, to get really cynical about men and boys. And I'm a teacher as well. I teach boys. I tutor boys. And what romance novels now do is they give me hope about men, about cishet men, because of such a diversity of heroes being portrayed now. The cinnamon roll hero, the hero that isn't afraid to show his feelings. There's no more bossing. I mean, depending on where you are in romance, like Maya said, there's certain subgenres that still have the alpha male, but we're reading a lot more male characters, heroes that you would like to know in real life, that you wish existed in real life, because then you can have a conversation with them without feeling that they're gonna do something dodgy to you because you're female, you're a woman, right? So I think that, at least from my observation over 20 plus years of reading romance, is that the heroes have never been better. They've evolved so much, and I also read other genres, and they've, like I said, this is a hill I'm gonna die on. Romance is leagues ahead of most other genres when it comes to not just the female gaze, but also depicting healthy relationships and also healthy masculinities, and showing us that men should be able to emote. They should be able to talk to us about talk openly about their feelings and not hide them and not be emotionally constipated, because that's what got us into. That's part of what got us into the issue that we have now, right? Toxic masculinity, men expressing their negative feelings by using violence, by using rage, by using anger. But if men and boys if boys are taught that it's okay to cry, it's okay to tell someone that you love them, it's okay to have female friends and be nice to everyone and talk out your feelings and talk out your problems, instead of going from zero to rage and then start hitting everybody and doing nasty things. I think if boys do read romance, I think they'll get a lot out of it. Oh, that leads me to an audience question here about when talking about boys. Misty 306 is a librarian, and she said, your books are read and are enjoyed by both adults and by teens. She says, I'm a librarian. I can't stop kids from reading your books. Why do you believe both age groups enjoy your stories? So let's go with Maya.
So when I was doing the research for my book, Dangerous Books for Girls, I did the surveys of when people started reading romance novels. And this is unofficial math, but it essentially is there. But it was 95% of people start reading romance around 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. They sneak them from the library. They sneak them from mom's bedside, auntie's purse, grandma's bookshelf. So you're not going to stop them. Please don't stop them. And, I think there's something so primal about romance. The story, the beats. If you're a young girl, when you're finding those stories that have a female focus for the first time in your life, that's not a Sleeping Beauty Disney princess kind of thing, that's enormous. But also it's talks about, big feelings, falling in love, sexual desire and feelings and all the conflict. And it's, I think we're always going through it. And I think when you're young, you're experiencing it for the first time. And these books can be a guide and a comfort for you. When you're an adult, you're still working through stuff. Maybe you want to feel that feeling of falling in love for the first time again. These are such emotional stories and universally emotional stories. So I think that's why they appeal to people of any age. What do we say at RWA or in Romancelandia? 18 to 80 and beyond, as our demographics. I've personally met them all. So
Sonali, what do you think?
So again, yes, to everything Maya said, I think it hits at, I think romance novels, like I said, I'm sorry with my squeaky chair, but I think developmentally, so much of who we become has to do with, what makes us feel loved. how we express love, right? And both those things, whatever is our natural way of doing it, gets mirrored. When it's mirrored in the stories around us, whether it's film, whether it's books, it kind of makes us feel like, yes, the way I feel naturally is okay, right? And so it helps us come into ourselves. And I think that that's, I think, one of the reasons why young people like reading love stories is because, oh, these feelings I'm having, um, A, they're normal, B, they're going to lead me to happiness. And that's a very nice way of feeling, right? And so that's A. I think for me particularly, a lot of young people read my books, starting more so from the Rajes, not so much the Bollywood stories, but starting from the Rajes, I think is simply the fact, again, that it's a grown-up story that isn't, it's a grown up. So this is a lot of young South Asian people. Like all the time, my friends will, go to dinner to some. My friend was at, someone's place for dinner, and she came back to my house, and she said, their 18-year-old has read all your books, and she's like, oh my God, you know her. And so a lot of young South Asian people are reading me because I think that they're only seeing one sliver or one angle of their culture reflected in stories, right? The strict parents, the pushing for arranged marriage, those are like the traditional stereotypes, typical stories that they get to consume. So when they find a story about a family, siblings bickering, parents who are having real conversation with these kids, whose only obsession is not their children getting married, but also have all the pressures of needing to be overachievers, all of those other things. So I think it feels kind of very real to them, and they like, even if they have felt this regressive atmosphere in their own homes, they like this other view. So even when they come and say, oh my God, this is not how it was in my home, they like the idea that there's another way to be South Asian American, and I think that specifically that's the reason younger people like it, is because seeing themselves in these non-traditional, seeing themselves as something more than just a nerd, right? Seeing themselves as a sexual being and a romantic being, and all of that is I think what pulls them in. And again, like Maya was saying, the fun, right? It's not, if the only stories we're given is stories of persecution and poverty porn, then it's like, but that's not how my life is how a lot of these kids think, right? So being able to have fun with the fact that their parents might be over the top in some ways. My one of my kids' favorite things is making fun of me. It's a thing, it's all kids making fun of their parents, best thing ever, right? So to be able to do it in this healthy way that also feels real, I think that's why young people specifically, or at least all the young people that I meet who read my books that are Indian and South Asian, tend to say those things.
Leanna, what about you?
Well, I have also directly written young adult too, so I feel like we are also jumping sometimes genre fields where our books are in fact in the teen shelves sometimes, so in that regard, I always try to keep an eye on my content, because I've realized through the years that my style and my voice does best in like a PG-13 range, because I know I have like a lot of really smart 9-year-olds who really love my darker still Magic Most Foul books, and I want them to be able to pick up anything else that I write, because it's all set in the same universe with crossover characters. I want them to be able to pick anything else up and it still be in that kind of PG-13 range. That's just what works for my voice. That's not me saying any kind of like, that anyone else needs to apply those labels to their work. It's just that that's how it's worked out for me. And I tend to have a range of some younger characters. So I do think there's also just representation. So thankfully teens, and I have a lot of like families or teens and adults who will read stuff together, because there are younger characters represented and there's older characters represented. I tend to have a big cast of characters in most of the things that I'm doing. So I am always trying to think about that as a writer, to make sure that people feel represented. I have a bunch of different groups of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and I make sure I hire sensitivity readers for anything that's outside of my lane of experience, and just try to create like a found family narrative. And I think for kids, and yes, there's some of that found family is then finding a romance in that, but also too, young people are figuring out their social groups too. And so when you have an experience, a journey full of big feelings, that's going to resonate, I think.
Okay. So coming up to the second to last question, let's look at the future. So we've been talking about what's happened in the past 10 years. We've been talking about what's happening currently. So do you all have any tips and suggestions for publishers and not publishers, editors and authors who wish to join efforts to address sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in the romance space? So let's start with Maya.
Do you want to start with someone else first?
Oh, okay. So let's start with Sonali.
Thanks for putting me.
Sorry, okay,
I'm kidding.
Okay.
No, I'll go. I think of course that is so first I'll say my current editor is very, very, and she's a younger person. She's in her 30s, and so it's millennial, right? So she is very, very hypersensitive to any kind of violence on the page, even if it is, I hate saying this, but I'm from a generation where, some physical humor, I would just wanted to shake him, or, having mental pictures of dismembering people, not really, but you know what I mean? Like those, it can be funny to me, comic violence can be funny to me, and I understand the pitfalls of that. But she is very very overtly sensitive about that, and she is like, we're going to be really, really careful. And I love having her there to say where, because we all have blind spots, right? And the whole point is to do this and to reduce your blind spots. And so I think that already there is an awareness. My editor, for sure, I'm really grateful for her, and I think that is a thing to consider, because there is so many. Now people often ask me, is there anything you would change in your old books? And I am, I think, in the minority when I kind of really love every one of my books, and I kind of, and I say that in all modesty, I've put everything I had in them, and I would not change anything. And I do go back and read them when I'm feeling down and things like that. So I'm a complete, apparently that's not what most authors do, but there are still things, about, in my first book, I had the heroine's waist be small enough that he could span it with his hands, which is, I think, every single romance author has done it. And if I could change one thing, like that would be something I would change. I wish I hadn't done that. And so, of course, there are, but at the time, it was just coded, romance trope language. And so we are, and so I think things like that, like she really wanted to shake him and, oh my God, kick him in the shins and things like that. So in both ways, my editor is very, and I do stop and I kind of think about that now, and I won't do it. And I think just continually being, I think, open. I think the best thing that publishing in general can do is to go from the mindset of, oh my gosh, you guys are being woke and taking the joy out of art, to being, what have we missed and what is a healthier narrative, and kind of using that as their guiding light is always fantastic. And I think more and different stories, and that's one of the best things that has happened with whatever little change that's come about with the space being opened from being just white cis stories to this thing where you're feeling a little more welcome in this space. And I think that some of it is that it's opening, with every story you read that's about someone who isn't straight white, your way of storytelling is changing, your way of thinking about the world is changing, all of that is changing. And so I think they can't buy enough, and I even hate saying diverse books, because I don't think of myself as a diverse person, and I hate being, rubber stamped as diverse author. I am, South Asian American. Someone else is, Thai American, and someone else is something else. To take anyone who's not white and straight and call them diverse first is wrong. But what I'm saying is every kind of voice that you can include, and the more voices that you include in publishing, obviously your story is going to elevate, right? And some of it is going to feel like it's unsellable at the start of it because you've trained a readership to only expect one thing for 200 years. And so now as you're changing that, it's going to take some, oh my god, my hero is not an alpha hole, how am I going to get turned on by that? But honey, you are going to get turned on by that, because a gentleman who's soft on the outside, inside vulnerable, all of that is just as hot if you just kind of switch the lens a little bit. So
Yeah. Okay. Who's next? Maya, do you want to go? Or Leanna? Oh, Maya.
I'll piggyback on that. Do you mind, Leanna?
Yeah, go. You've got it. Good.
I mean, Sonali, everything you said, and I love, I took a note of like blind spots and inherited expectations. So, because I think as authors, we got into this because we love romance, right? Because we're romance readers, and we fell in love with books at a certain moment. And we get this idea of what we need to write to sell, what we need to write to be like our heroes. And so we can end up kind of like inadvertently continuing to romance, maybe some problematic tropes or aspects of stories. And like keep passing that down, and we might not even be aware of it. So like one example is I was writing in Duchess in Design, the hero and heroine had a fight on a New York City street and she stormed off. And I was like, oh, the hero followed her for her protection. And I was like, wait a minute. That's creepy. That's stalker behavior. She's also the native New Yorker and he's the out-of-towner Duke. He's the one in danger here, not her. But I had to catch myself and question his behavior and their characters and all of these things. And it became a problem then, because that was chapter 3. And what was I going to do in chapter 4 if they've completely lost contact with each other? And I had like 70 more thousand words to fill. So the practicalities and technicalities of writing these stories can like come up. But when you're aware of those blind spots, when someone calls you on them, when you're like, I love a boss secretary trope, but it's problematic, but how can I make it not problematic? When you start to play with it with a new, more modern lens and eyes, like that's how we move the genre forward. So I think the more people call out blind spots among each other will help us all. And, I don't like the call out culture on social media and stuff, but it definitely will, as a lurker, will make me go, oh, like I'm going to check that in my own writing and things like that. So publishing professionals, I think they need to help authors find the blind spots or be aware, point those things out, and be also willing to engage with stories that break the rules or play with those trope and reader expectations.
Okay. So, Leanna, any thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that just everything that my colleagues here are saying, all of that, yes, continuing to showcase the widest range of voices as possible, because that builds empathy, and empathy is de-escalatory in violence. So the more empathy that we have as a culture, as a world, the more stories that we realize, like, oh, that person might not look like me, but I can relate. And you relate by learning something about their story, by taking a journey through their viewpoint. And that's so the broader range of voices, yes, please continue to do that in publishing. I think it's helpful. I don't think that people should be limited in the types of content they create, but I do think things like trigger warnings and content warnings, a page, if you know that you're going to be having some very, very sensitive material in your work, having access where there can be a content warning page so that readers who might be re-traumatized by something can have a sense of all of that. I mean, that's definitely something for our Giving the Devil His Due, our Read for Pixels anthology, which was dealing with some very violent content. We were navigating that, discussing all of us as authors about how do we present this almost the myth of redemptive violence kind of thing that we're bringing into this anthology. That's a conversation that I want publishing to continue to have, of how can readers who want to engage with certain types of content find it, and who don't want to engage with other types of content, know to avoid it without constraining the artist. And so that, I don't know the answer to all of that, but I kind of wish I'd had some sort of content advisory pages on some of my stuff before I had put things out. But at the same time, I welcome that discussion now of like, okay, here are some things within this book that if you're going to be squeamish about X, Y, or Z, or if this is going to be too much X, Y, or Z, I want readers to be aware and to not engage if they're just not going to be able to connect with it. So, but at the same time, I do want there to still be a culture of open and honest discussions about things, because we are all dealing with nitty-gritty aspects of life. So yeah, I don't necessarily have any of the answers of this, but I do think that the more that we can collectively talk, and that publishing professionals can be watching, like Maya said, the call out culture, and watching what people are reacting to one way or another, to make sure that we're not walking into something that we really didn't mean. I really kind of love the Wiccan sort of motto of harm no other, do what you will. Harm no other being first and foremost, which is difficult to do when you think about it truly and broadly. But then then do what you will. But for me as a writer, I feel like that harm no other is at the forefront, and I try to keep that as a core principle, which is why reading broadly, and learning from my friends, and having a wide range of voices in my life to learn from is also very important.
Okay, so one final question from the audience, and we'll quickly go to wrap up. And Ella Dawson, hi Ella, we saved the best for last. She said, Ella says, I'd love to know if the panel have any recommendations of great romance novels about domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Let's start with Maya, because Maya has actually written one.
Well, I have to, the one I could speak most knowledgeably about is my own novel, What a Wallflower Wants. The heroine is a survivor of sexual assault, and she gets her happy ever after, and she gets a really great love story with a hero who is obviously not the person who assaulted her. And the first romance I ever read was The Flame and the Flower, and that begins with a sexual assault by the hero to the heroine, and I was like, how the heck is this going to end happily? And we'll have another live stream to talk about that book. But when I wrote What a Wallflower Wants, I wanted to call it The Flame and the Wallflower. And it was my response to that of like, this horrible thing happened, but it is not the heroine. It does not define her. It is really a story of her healing and coming into herself and finding a really good, gentle love and true happy ever after. So I wanted to rewrite how romance had written that story in the past. But it was also tremendously inspired by horrible news stories at the time. So I wanted to write a happy ever after for people who experience this and this heroine.
Okay. Sonali, any recommendations? I think you're muted.
I have, yes. I was muted because of my squeaky chair. But yeah, I think again, as Maya said, I can speak best to my own work, and I wrote a book called A Change of Heart, which has a gang sexual assault on the page, and and it is it's the story of someone, surviving in the most essential sort of way, right? Because there's, I mean, she's had a really awful experience and childhood and life, and to find a love that can feel like true healing on the page, is a pretty, I would say, challenging thing to do without without making it feel trite or easy. And I think another thing with, so it's the story of basically this guy who's this couple who are Doctors Without Borders doctors, and so they work in all these dangerous parts of the world, and the wife is killed. So it really was my exploration into what happens if a happily ever after that we sell with such, with such aplomb in this genre goes away, right? What happens then? So I wanted kind of, there is happily ever after happily ever after goes wrong. And I actually wrote the hero with another heroine, and there was this thing about surface cracks and deep cracks for me, where he was someone who was grieving and who basically hadn't healed from his, the death of his wife. And no heroine felt so Jess, who is the heroine, has makes him see that his cracks are surface cracks and that there are deeper cracks. So there's this whole like levels of pain and healing thing that happens in the book. The only thing I will say is, as maybe a trigger warning, is that this is not a vigilante story, and she doesn't get justice for the crime per se, but justice for her in her life through happiness. Success is the best revenge, which is not to say that people shouldn't expect justice, but it kind of is, I think, delves into all of those things. And I do think it's a really strong healing story. So that journey.
Okay. Liana, do you have a book you would like to recommend?
Well, I do think that there's some romantic elements in some of the stories in our Pixels Projects anthology. Although that's not, it is not a romance novel. It is not a romance anthology. So just a fair warning on that. But one of the things that I wanted to do in my story in that was show a romance budding out of the ashes of this woman's experience. So I certainly do that within my story in Giving the Devil His Due. It's an origin story for one of my most beloved characters who has been a matriarch through so many of my books. And so I really wanted to kind of give her origin story a little bit of time and space. And so I was able to do that and showcase that something beautiful and tender can come from an assault scenario. And a book that I currently have out on submission is also a romance that is dealing with it's a woman who has survived assaults in her past. So I I hope I will be able to recommend that at some point in the not too terribly far future. But thank you for the question, and I definitely am always eager to hear about this type of topic, because I want healing for that, and for people to be able to process their experiences by reading other stories of resilience and of care and compassion also.
All right. So we've come to the end of the discussion session. So because Sonali and Liana have to leave very soon, we'll just quickly go through the fundraiser that is happening right now to fund our work. So I'm just going to stick that on there. So, all right. So we have, thank you so much, everyone, Liana, Maya, and Sonali, for being with us today for our 10th anniversary of the campaign. As we mentioned at the start of the session, we have some fabulous treats for romance fans, courtesy of Maya and quite a few other romance luminaries. So I've stuck our slide on the screen. You can go to this website, our fundraising page. Go to tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up 2023. This is cap sensitive, so make sure that you type everything carefully, and you can find out more about the Read for Pixels campaign, which has been we've hosted just about 300 authors, worked with so many publishers and literary agents over the years. You can find out more about what we do, what we've achieved, what's coming up. If you go to bit.ly/readforpixels, again, it's case sensitive. Now, Maya is offering 2 different goodie bundles. Now, we've been talking about Maya's Gilded Age Girls Club books. And Maya has, one of her bundles is actually the entire trilogy. You can get it from our fundraising page if you donate to us. And there's also the Regency Wallflowers goodie bundle, which has the book that Maya recommended in it, well, a Wallflower Once. And both bundles have 2 types of exclusive extras, including a personal handwritten and signed letter from Maya and a set of fun stickers to go with it. So you can stick it in your book, and you can stick it in your water bottle and all that. Now, aside from Maya, Eloisa James, one of the grand dames of historical romance, is offering free bundles, which each contain a signed hardcover edition and 1 bookmark. And bundle 1 has Midnight Pleasures, bundle 2 has Wild Child, and bundle 3 is the Lizzie and Dante bundle, which is a little bit different because it's a contemporary romance that Eloisa is writing as Mary Bly. And we also have a treat from Mimi Matthews, who couldn't be with us today. Mimi has a original story that she's approximately 500 words of one of her most popular couples that she's written to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of Read for Pixels. There are only 25 copies of the story available, and she'll email donors a soft copy of the story for their enjoyment. Right now, there's only 16 copies left, so if you want a copy, please rush over to make your donation. And there are plenty more author goodies from authors including Anne Bishop, C.S.E. Clooney, Charlene Harris, Cynthia Pelayo, Jasper Ford, and more. And we have raised $3,955 so far, which is 39% towards our $10,000 goal. Please give generously to help us keep our campaigns and programs such as this one running. And just very quickly, Leanna mentioned Giving the Devil His Due. That's only available until October 31st. That's when we're wrapping it up. It's going to go out of print afterwards, and you won't be able to get it. So it's available now from Amazon, Kobo, Google Play. Well, not Book Depository, since that's gone. Sorry about the older slide. And all other major booksellers worldwide. And you can get more information about the anthology from bit.ly/Giving the Devil His Due. Again, this is cat sensitive. Xiao Chin who's today's producer, is sharing all the links in the YouTube chat. And if you want it in audiobook, we have a whole cast of award-winning audiobook readers reading out the stories, and the audiobooks available from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and other major audiobook retailers worldwide. You can find out more about the audiobook from tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R4P. And again, it's case sensitive. Now, I'm going to put everyone back on the screen. So I think some of you have announcements for the audience before we go. So I think Sonali first, because you have one coming up really soon, right? You have a new book. Sonali, you're muted.
I haven't said anything yet, but it's this comes out September 26th, Lies in Other Love Languages. And I think one of the things that we didn't talk about is, is men being different in the domestic space, and how, so the hero in this and the heroine have, a little bit of the stay-at-home dad, go to work mom thing happening, and how the community has a hard time wrapping its head around it. Although that's not what the story is about. The story is about female friendships and a best friendship between women, between 2 women that breaks up over a surrogacy arrangement. So September 26th.
All right. So anyone else with any announcements? Vienna, do you have any announcements?
Just spooky season is coming. Spooky season is coming. So, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts. It's real women, real history, real ghosts, and it is really good for spooky seasons. So please check it out. It's been a really important national conversation we've been having about how ghost lore can help us understand women's history.
All right. Maya, any announcements on your end?
Just if anyone who enjoyed this conversation tonight might also enjoy my Substack newsletter, Exo Romance. We talk about all of this a lot every week. So you can find that at mayarodale.substack.com.
Okay. So thank you all so much for being with us today. Everyone, thank you for being with us today. We've enjoyed having you with us. And we have 2 more live streams happening this week. One is Cynthia Pelayo, who's a horror author and poet. That's happening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow on Saturday. And we have one with, let me get his name right, Sylvain Duval. I think that's how we pronounce it. He's the acclaimed Canadian science fiction author of The Themis Files. We're having him on Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So anyway, have a good weekend, everyone. Have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world. And all of us are saying thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.